On a warm and sunny afternoon, 7-year-old Timmy was sitting at the edge of the local pond, fishing and hoping to catch something exciting. He had just picked up fishing recently after his grandpa gave him a brand new fishing rod. After a few long, quiet hours, he finally felt a tug. He quickly yanked the rod upward, expecting a big fish. But instead of a fish, something heavy and soggy came out. It was an old algae-covered purse. Timmy felt a mix of curiosity and disappointment. He opened the purse just to see what was inside, but the moment he looked, his face went pale. Whatever he saw had clearly scared him. He let out a loud scream, dropped the bag on the ground, and took off running. "Mom! Dad!" he shouted at the top of his lungs. Within minutes, he was back at the house, out of breath and red in the face. He rushed inside and found his parents in the kitchen, in the middle of making dinner. "Timmy, is everything okay?" his mom asked as soon as she saw him. He was sweaty, panting, and looked completely shaken up. "Whoa, what happened, buddy? Where's your fishing stuff?" his dad asked, clearly confused. Timmy looked at both of them, but stayed silent for a moment. He just stared at the floor and let out a big sigh. "Tim, what is it?" his mom asked again gently. She walked over, got down on one knee, and looked into his eyes. "You know you can tell us anything, sweetheart," she added. Timmy took a deep breath and finally spoke. "I found something in the pond," he said. "What do you mean? Did you catch something?" his dad asked, sounding hopeful. Timmy often came back empty-handed, and his dad knew how that let him down. But this time, the catch was something else entirely. "Yeah, I did, but Timmy began, but he couldn't finish. The words caught in his throat, and he suddenly broke down into tears. "Oh, honey, it's okay," his mom said softly. "Do you want us to come with you to the pond?" Timmy nodded, wiping at his face. He was clearly very upset now, and both his parents could see something had truly rattled him. So, without hesitation, they turned off the stove and followed Timmy back outside. They could tell something was wrong, but had no clue what it might be. He probably saw a hurt fish or something, his dad whispered to his mom, trying to keep things light. But he was wrong. What Timmy had found was something much worse. A few minutes later, they arrived at the pond. The bag was still lying there, just where Timmy had dropped it. "There," he said quietly, pointing at it. His mom glanced at the bag and gave a small smile. "Oh, Timmy, that's just a bag. I have a bunch of those. Is that what scared you?" she asked, still unaware of what it held. If Timmy hadn't been so shaken, he probably would have rolled his eyes. Of course, the bag wasn't the scary part. Instead, he just shook his head and said, "It's not the bag, Mom. It's what I found inside it." His parents looked at each other, puzzled. Timmy's dad stepped forward, finally deciding to see for himself what had upset his son so much. Just as Timmy's dad was about to pick up the bag, Timmy suddenly cried out, "Please, Dad, be careful." A single tear slipped down his cheek. He was still just a kid, but he knew enough to realize this could be something really serious. Right then, he wished he hadn't gone fishing at all that day, wished he'd never pulled that bag from the water. He crouched down and began carefully pulling items from the bag, one by one. Inside, there were different tools, like a saw, a hammer, and some rope. But those things didn't explain Timmy's reaction. His parents could tell something else had to be in there. Then, just a few seconds later, Timmy's dad suddenly froze. "Oh, no. Monica, come look at this," he said, his voice tight. She was still standing nearby with her arm around Timmy's shoulders. When she saw what he was holding, she gasped and put a hand over her mouth. "Oh, is it real?" she asked, eyes wide. "I think so," her husband replied. "We should take this straight to the police." "Timmy, where exactly did you find this bag?" she asked, turning toward her son. Timmy explained that he'd reeled it up while fishing and that he'd run straight home when he opened it and saw what was inside. "That was a really smart move, Bud," his dad said. "We'll take care of it from here." The three of them headed back to the house, with Timmy's dad carrying the bag. Once they got home, he turned to them and said, "You two go ahead and have dinner. I'll take this to the station." Monica nodded and gave him a quick kiss goodbye, while Timmy's dad bent down to give his son a big, reassuring hug. "You did a great job today. You know that? You don't need to be scared anymore. Go eat with Mom." For the first time since the discovery, Timmy gave a tiny smile. He was still a bit shaken, but it helped to know his dad was going to handle it. "Thanks, Daddy. Be careful," he said softly, then turned and headed into the kitchen. Timmy's dad grabbed the bag, got into the car, and began the drive to the police station. "They're never going to believe this," he thought, glancing at the bag beside him. Once he arrived, he parked, picked up the bag, and walked inside. "Good evening, sir. I'm Officer Daniels. How can I help you?" the man at the front desk asked. "Hi, I'm Richard," Timmy's dad replied. "I came to turn this in." He placed the bag on the counter. "My son found it in the pond." After dropping off the mysterious bag at the police station, Richard figured that would be the end of it. But things took a strange turn. That night, he got a message on his phone. It read, "You'll regret bringing that bag to the police." At first, Richard thought it was some kind of prank, but there was something about it, something that made his stomach tighten. He tried to brush it off, but deep down, the message stuck with him. More text followed, each one worse than the last. They didn't give details, but all of them hinted at serious trouble for what he'd done. Richard found himself growing more nervous each day. He started checking over his shoulder, locking doors twice, and paying closer attention to strangers on the street. At home, he tried to keep everything normal, not wanting to scare Monica or Timmy. But inside, the worry was getting harder to hide. What if someone really was out there, watching them? Sleep didn't come easy anymore. He'd lie awake for hours, thinking about the bag and what might happen next. A troubling pattern started to form. Whoever was sending the messages seemed to know Richard's daily routines, mentioning little details only someone watching him would know. The realization sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't just about the texts anymore. It felt like someone was out there, watching him. His quiet, normal life suddenly felt invaded by something dark and invisible. Richard felt torn. Should he go back to the police and report the threats? Or would that only make things worse? He feared that involving the authorities might draw more attention and possibly put Monica and Timmy in even more danger. But at the same time, trying to deal with it alone was becoming harder by the day. The weight of it was wearing him down. In the end, Richard chose not to go to the police, for now. He was worried that escalating things might push the person behind the messages to do something worse. Instead, he decided to keep a close eye on everything, hoping the threats would eventually stop. He was constantly on edge, watching for anything out of the ordinary, trying to hold it together for his family. Eventually, the pressure became too much to carry alone. One night, in the quiet of their bedroom, Richard finally told Monica about the messages. As she listened, her face shifted from confusion to disbelief and then to deep concern. They both agreed on one thing: Timmy couldn't know. The idea of their little boy being caught up in this was unthinkable. Richard and Monica promised to protect Timmy no matter what. They knew they had to keep the fear hidden from him, to keep his world as safe and normal as possible. They spent that night going over ways to shield him from the stress they were feeling, but it wasn't easy. Pretending everything was fine while living in fear was like walking a tightrope. Still, even with that plan, the stress didn't go away. Richard and Monica started feeling the weight of the secret growing between them. They'd share worried looks throughout the day, and sometimes their conversations just faded into silence. The house, which had always been filled with chatter and warmth, now felt quieter, heavier. They tried their best to keep life feeling normal for Timmy, but the pressure was slowly building. Late at night, once Timmy was asleep, Richard and Monica would talk quietly about what to do next. Monica began to question whether staying silent was the right move. What if things got worse? Maybe it was time to involve the police again. But Richard held firm. He still believed that handling it themselves was the safer option. Neither of them knew if they were making the right choice, and that uncertainty just added to the tension. Each day felt a little heavier, and the sense of fear hung around the edges of everything. Timmy, sensitive as always, started picking up on the change. He began asking little questions, noticing the shift in mood. Richard and Monica did their best to smile and reassure him, but even those smiles felt strained. The home that once felt peaceful and full of love now carried an air of quiet fear. It was like a shadow was always there, hanging just behind them. Richard couldn't ignore it anymore. Something had to change. Frustrated by the lack of answers and growing threats, Richard made a choice. He decided to go back to where it all started, the pond. Maybe he'd missed something. Maybe there was a clue left behind. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but he knew he couldn't just sit and wait for something bad to happen. It was time to do something. It was a choice Richard made from the gut, a decision fueled by his growing need to protect his family. Back at the pond, he carefully searched the area, scanning every corner for something, anything that felt out of place. Footprints, trash, tire marks. He looked at it all, hoping something might stand out. He even started talking to neighbors nearby, gently asking if they'd seen anything odd around the pond recently. Even the tiniest detail felt like it could be part of something bigger. With each small clue, Richard felt like he was inching closer to the truth. He began piecing things together, little by little. The search quickly turned into something more, a quiet mission he kept entirely to himself. No one, not even Monica, knew how far he was going. He spent hours digging through local records and news articles, and even stopped by small businesses nearby to ask subtle questions. Every night after Timmy was in bed, Richard sat down and reviewed everything he'd found, trying to make sense of it all. His secret investigation soon took over his thoughts. It became something he couldn't ignore, something that filled every spare moment. The need to protect his family and to understand the danger they were in pushed him deeper into it. And slowly, small things started to line up. A few people mentioned strange vehicles parked near the pond in the days before Timmy's discovery. An old article hinted at a string of unsolved minor crimes in the same area. Bit by bit, Richard knew he was close to uncovering something serious, but he also knew it came with risks. He started noticing cars he didn't recognize parked near his street. Sometimes he'd feel eyes on him, even when no one was around. The deeper he went, the more certain he became that someone didn't want him finding answers. Still, he couldn't stop, not when his family's safety was possibly on the line. Then, the situation took a sharper turn. A new message arrived, short, direct, and terrifying. Return the bag. The words were clear. There was no confusion about what the sender wanted, and no mistaking the threat behind them. Richard stood frozen, a chill creeping down his spine. What started as a harmless fishing trip now felt like a nightmare that wouldn't end. He felt completely stuck. On one hand, giving in might protect Monica and Timmy. On the other, it could mean helping whoever was behind this and undoing whatever progress the police had made. The choice wasn't simple. It wasn't even fair. Richard was stuck between his sense of right and wrong and the instinct to protect the people he loved most. No matter what he chose, there was risk. The threats didn't stop. They only got worse. Each message was more intense, more personal. It was like the sender knew every move Richard made, always one step ahead. The pressure was building fast. His thoughts became clouded by fear, and paranoia began to set in. He tried to keep things normal at home, but it was no use. Monica could feel the shift. Even Timmy seemed to notice something was off. The stress, though unspoken, hung thick in the air. And then, in the middle of his deep dive into the mystery, Richard stumbled across something unexpected, a discovery that could finally change everything. Richard came across a recent news report about a robbery in the area, and something about it stopped him cold. The items stolen in the report sounded almost exactly like what had been inside the bag Timmy found. This changed everything. It meant the bag wasn't just lost or discarded. It was tied to a real crime. The whole situation suddenly felt even more serious and far more dangerous. With every new piece of the puzzle, Richard felt the pressure building. If the bag was connected to an active investigation, then what he and Timmy had stumbled upon wasn't just important, it was critical evidence. That also meant the people behind the threats were desperate to get it back. And desperate people, Richard knew, could do anything. As his sense of safety continued to erode, Richard saw the full weight of what they were facing. The threats were no longer random or vague. They were coming from people who had a lot to lose. He realized the bag was a key link in a robbery case, and whoever was behind it would go to great lengths to stay hidden. That made the danger to his family feel even more real. As Richard kept digging, he started to line things up. The description of the suspects in the robbery matched the tone and content of the threats he had been receiving. Piece by piece, the story was becoming clearer. But with every answer came more risk. He felt like he was getting closer to figuring it all out, but each step forward also meant stepping deeper into something dark and unpredictable. The constant stress started wearing on him. Richard found himself jumping at small noises and staring too long at strangers. He couldn't tell if he was just being cautious or slipping into full-blown paranoia. Every knock at the door, every unfamiliar car on the street, it all set his nerves on edge. He was losing the ability to tell what was real and what was just fear-talking. As things got worse, Richard started to question whether he had done the right thing by going to the police in the first place. He worried that turning in the bag had made them a target. The idea that Monica or Timmy could get hurt because of his choice was almost too much to bear. He didn't know what the right move was anymore. Every path seemed dangerous. The sense that he was being followed became more frequent. Richard started noticing cars idling near their house a little longer than normal, or the same person passing by more than once. Maybe, in another situation, he could have written it off as nothing. But now, everything felt like a warning. Each strange moment added another layer to the fear growing inside him. The feeling of being watched never left Richard, creeping into every part of his daily life. Unseen eyes seemed to follow him wherever he went, making even simple routines feel exposed. The anonymous texts and calls never stopped. In fact, they got worse, more forceful, more demanding with every message. What used to be just a phone in his pocket now felt like a constant threat. Every buzz, every ringtone made his chest tighten. It wasn't just communication anymore. It was a daily invasion of his peace. The pressure of it all completely turned Richard's life upside down. Work became difficult. He struggled to focus, made mistakes, and avoided meetings. Friends started to notice his distance, and even casual conversations felt exhausting. He stopped showing up to social events, and the hobbies that once helped him relax didn't seem worth the effort. Each day, his confidence wore thinner. He started to wonder if reporting the bag was the right move after all. Regret crept in, feeding doubts that circled in his head non-stop. Wanting to feel like he had some control left, Richard began making changes. He looked into home security systems and made a point to vary his routes to and from work. He even reached out for legal advice, hoping for some guidance on how to handle the threat. But no matter what steps he took, the anxiety lingered. He was constantly on edge, just hoping for something, anything, to break the cycle and bring some peace. The stress became too much to carry. The fear for his family's safety, the pressure of the non-stop threats, it all started to break him down. Richard finally realized he couldn't handle it alone anymore. With shaky hands and a heavy heart, he returned to the police station. There, he handed over his phone and showed the officers the long string of threatening messages. They listened closely, their faces shifting between concern and focus. The officers didn't waste time. Using technology to trace the source of the calls and texts, they soon managed to track down the location tied to the phone that had been sending the threats. As Richard watched the investigation pick up speed, he felt something new, a flicker of hope mixed with nervous energy. Seeing the police take real action made it all feel more real, and that was both comforting and frightening. As the investigation went deeper, more details came to light. The number used to send the messages was connected to known criminal activity in the area. This revelation gave the police a clearer path to follow. Every bit of evidence they uncovered brought them one step closer to unmasking the person behind it all. For Richard, watching things unfold stirred a strange mix of emotions, relief that help had finally arrived, and fear of what might happen next. Richard soon found himself more involved than he expected. His detailed account of everything, from Timmy's discovery to the ongoing threats, helped shape the case. The officers valued his insight and asked for his help piecing together timelines and motives. For the first time in a while, Richard didn't feel completely powerless. He was part of the effort to bring the truth to light. Working with the police gave Richard a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just doing this for his family anymore. He was also driven by the need to see justice served. That feeling of finally being supported, of having someone in his corner, brought a kind of comfort he hadn't felt since all of this began. As the investigation moved forward day by day, a small spark of hope began to grow. The officers told Richard they were getting close to making an arrest. For someone who had spent weeks in fear and uncertainty, this news was like a lifeline. It eased the tight grip anxiety had on him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things might return to normal. The case took a major turn when police confirmed that the bag Timmy had found contained a gun, and not just any gun, but the one used in the recent robbery. This information changed everything. The threats Richard had been receiving weren't random. They were tied directly to a serious crime. When he heard the news, Richard felt two things at once: relief that he had been right to go to the police, and fear about how deeply he was now caught in something so dangerous. Thanks to the gun, the police were able to connect the threatening messages to the person responsible for the robbery. The suspect, now identified, had been desperate to get the bag back to erase any trace of their crime. For Richard, knowing the full link between the threats and the robbery helped explain everything, but it also made the danger feel even more real. Now that they had a suspect in their sights, the police started putting a plan together to make the arrest. They moved carefully, not wanting to risk Richard's safety or the safety of others. The officer's calm and professional approach helped ease some of his nerves. He could see they were closing in, and he started to believe this might finally end. Then came the breakthrough. The police uncovered a key piece of evidence, something they didn't share publicly, but which tied everything together. It was the missing link they had been waiting for. With this final proof, the case was solid. Richard felt a rush of relief just knowing they had what they needed. It meant that soon, the person behind all of this would finally be caught. With all the evidence in place, the police prepared to move in. They coordinated carefully, ready to make the arrest and bring this chapter to a close. Meanwhile, Richard waited, tense but hopeful. After everything they had been through, the fear, the silence, the threats, he just wanted it to be over. And now, the end was finally in sight. Justice was finally served. The police operation went smoothly, and the suspect was taken into custody without any trouble. When Richard got the news, he felt a deep wave of relief. The arrest marked the end of a long stretch filled with fear and uncertainty. Knowing the person behind the threats was no longer out there gave him and his family the peace they had been hoping for. After the arrest, the officers shared more details about the case with Richard. The man responsible had been connected to a string of local crimes, and the gun found in the bag turned out to be the key piece of evidence linking him to those acts. The threatening messages Richard had received were desperate attempts to get that gun back and destroy it. Hearing just how far the criminal had gone was both shocking and eye-opening for Richard. It was hard to believe it had all started with Timmy finding a bag at the pond. What seemed like an ordinary day had quickly turned into something none of them could have imagined. Richard couldn't shake the thought of how quickly life could be turned upside down. The experience left a lasting mark on him. When he got home after the arrest, Richard gathered with Monica and Timmy to share the news. He explained everything in a calm, simple way that Timmy could understand without getting scared. The whole experience had brought them closer together. They appreciated each other more now, and the bond they shared felt even stronger than before. It was finally over, but it would always be something they remembered. The man behind the threats was now facing multiple charges. Richard followed the legal case closely, attending hearings and staying updated on each step. Watching justice play out brought him a sense of closure. It reminded him why doing the right thing, no matter how scary, was always worth it. After the case was officially closed, Richard and Monica decided it was time to tell Timmy the full story. They sat him down and carefully explained everything that had happened. Timmy listened with wide, curious eyes, amazed that the old bag he found had been such a big deal. The experience became an important lesson for him and for his parents about safety, honesty, and staying aware of the world around them. Word of what happened began to spread through the neighborhood. People reached out to the family with kind words, support, and gratitude. Local shops and friends showed appreciation for Richard's courage and the way he handled everything. That support meant a lot. In the quiet moments that followed, Richard often found himself thinking back on the whole journey. He thought about the decisions he made, the moments of doubt and fear, and the strength it took to keep going. With everything behind them now, the family was ready to move forward. They got back to their normal routines, but with a deeper appreciation for the peace and safety they once took for granted. Together, they stepped into the future, grateful and hopeful. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. It helps us keep telling stories like this, and who knows, the next one might be yours. Thanks for watching.